was really not a good time. You couldn't be lesbian and be a teacher, you'd get the sack.
The 1967 Act partially decriminalised sex between adult males, and what happened was the number of people prosecuted went up.
I had a good friend who was at another college who was sent down.
You find yourself talking to doctors of various kinds and just saying, you've got to change the way you think about people like us.
There was always something going on where you'd be required to do something a bit risky and dangerous.
It was dangerous to walk across Gloucester Green wearing an Afghan coat and a beard because you'd be arrested.
One day I looked down Castle Street and there was a pub with a rainbow flag flying on it, and I thought, yes, there are other gays in the village.
Yeah, I can remember 3 or 4 nights of friends of mine in tears, terrified of being disowned.
The gay culture was very real to me from a very early age. From the way I looked and dressed, it was completely obvious that I was gay.
I got my BA in the summer of 1971, and that's when my sort of queer life started, and it changed literally overnight. I went around Oxford on Saturday night looking for a party, and then on the stairs above me, I saw this man wearing a Gay Liberation front badge, and I was absolutely astounded. I couldn't believe that somebody could be so open about something that I'd been so tortured about.
By the time I came out in 1979, I was able to argue with my family with kind of classic gay liberation. No, this is why we need to come out. This is what the patriarchy is. This is what's wrong with it. I picked up all of those ideas by then. Thank God they saved my life.
There were 2 main organisations. There was the Gay Liberation Front, the one that was really trying to be revolutionary, and there was the Campaign for Homosexual Equality. That was the one which really just wanted to change the law, to introduce equality.
I was partly actually also fighting for the rights of bisexual people to be involved in the movement, which was a controversy in the 1980s.
The lesbian scene was very knitted together with the women's movement. There were Reclaim the Night marches. It was an era of, counterculture and do-it-yourself activism.
So where did I hang out? There was something called Parsons Pleasure, which was a men-only bathing place on the Charwell.
People from the town would have known that they could go there and socialise and hook up effectively.
There was a female place, Dame's Delight. So there was Dame's Delight and Parsons Pleasure.
What I heard about it was that it was cruising ground for old academic queens, yeah.
I was once punting by and I almost put my pole through Lord Hailsham.
The Stage Club in George Street was more of a town place.
It was down a little side street. It had an unmarked door where you had to knock. Someone came over with a plate of sausages and mash and told me I had to eat it. They had to serve food in order to get the license, and because obviously I didn't know what was what or who was who, I was the mug who got the sausages that evening.
There was the Red Lion, the pub, which was supposedly the gay pub at the time. About 5 minutes before closing time, I rushed across into the Red Lion, and I was so disappointed because you couldn't tell who the queers were. But we decided that Oxford needed something else. The 2 things I think as a group that we needed were we needed a switchboard and we needed a disco. One day I went down to the most run-down pub I could find, and that was the Cape of Good Hope. It was a classic Irish working class pub. And we started doing the discos, and they became hugely popular.
What I went to and enjoyed was the Oxford Gay Action Group discos, rock music, etc., subculture.
And it's all that kind of glam rock stuff. It's David Bowie, it's Lou Reed. That's the soundtrack of this period. It was a time of a lot of National Front activity, and they did find out about the disco, and they did put bricks through the windows. The Irish workers actually formed a kind of protective brigade, and I can remember sort of like having lists of where people were going, where they needed to catch buses, and they'd be accompanied by a couple of burly navvies, road workers or whatever, to the bus stop.
We used to go religiously to the Women's Centre for the Women's Centre discos.
But it was in a kind of a shop with a glass front with some curtains hiding us, and it became quite unsafe. But we used to have great fun there.
It's a hub for all of this other activity, including political activity, rape crisis lines.
A lot of the women were interested and active in Greenham Common, but I was more into just having fun and listening to the music.
The Coven was a really important part of the gay scene in the early 80s.
But it was basically men, and you might be the only couple there of women. I decided we needed a proper venue to have a disco.
We had the Co-op Disco on Wednesday nights. I think it's now a gig venue.
He said, you can run a disco here as long as it finishes at 11 o'clock. So we called it the Early Gays Disco because they had to be in early and out early. And people used to run, and you'd hear them galloping up these 72 stairs to get up there.
The Apollo was one of the first gay-run pubs. That ran quite up until, I think, the late 80s.
We then did a disco in the car park of the Apollo pub opposite the police station, and that was hilarious. I can remember we had one disco with a car in the middle of it, and the pigeons would all be roosting, and anybody that got shat on got a free drink.
This is the Jolly Farmers. It's been a pub here since 1592 and predominantly an LGBT venue since 1982. Back in the early 80s, there was a group of men who weren't drag acts, but quite cheekily dressed up in ladies' clothes. And they changed their names while they were in here based on the characters of Coronation Street. So there was Minnie and Betty, and they still now, 2 or 3 of them, still go by those names.
Hello. How are you doing in that? Are you doing okay?
Oxford Pride initially started as a street party to celebrate the Queen's Jubilee. I said, why isn't there a march? And they said, if you want to organise it, we'll support you. And it happened. Very small to start with. It's then grown each year and now starts at the Radcliffe Camera in the middle of the city and has fantastic visibility.
You know, in those days, people were just undercover, and now people can be out and proud, at last.
One felt part of a bigger movement at that time.
We're all on a journey. The journey goes backwards and forwards. I'm sure I'm not the only person in the room who's got lots of trans friends. You know, please don't anyone tell me everything's okay now, because it's not. I can't walk down the street with my friends in safety, and 5 years ago I could. But for me, the real issue is not identity. The issue is courage.